beautiful. Part 2 of chapter 27, the last chapter of The Secret Garden. What just happened? Archie, 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 it said, and then again sweeter and clearer than before. Archie, Archie. Do you remember that? That's where we finished. He thought he sprang to his feet, not even startled. It was such a real voice, and it seemed so natural that he should hear it. Lilias, Lilias, he answered. Lilias, where are you? In the garden. It came back like a sound from a golden flute. In the garden. And then the dream ended. But he did not awaken. He slept soundly and sweetly all through the lovely night. When he did awake at last, it was brilliant morning, and a servant was standing staring at him. He was an Italian servant and was accustomed, as all the servants of the villa were, to accepting without question any strange thing his foreign master might do. No one ever knew when he would go out or come in, or where he would choose to sleep, or if he would roam about the garden or lie in the boat on the lake all night. The man held a slaver with some letters on it, and he waited quietly until Mr. Craven took them. When he had gone away, Mr. Craven sat a few moments, holding them in his hand and looking at the lake. His strange calm was still upon him, and something more, a lightness, as if the cruel thing which had been done had not happened as he thought. As if something had changed, he was remembering the dream, the real dream. In the garden, he said, wondering at himself. In the garden, but the door is locked and the key is buried deep. When he glanced at the letters a few minutes later, he saw that the one lying at the top of the rest was an English letter and came from Yorkshire. It was directed in a plain woman's hand, but it was not a hand he knew. He opened it, scarcely thinking of the writer, but the first words attracted his attention at once. Dear Sir, I am Susan Sowerby, that made bold to speak to you once on the moor. It was about Miss Mary I spoke. I will make bold to speak again. Please, sir, I would come home if I was you. I think you would be glad to come home. And if you will excuse me, sir, I think your lady would ask you to come if she was here. Your obedient servant, Susan Sowerby. Mr. Craven read the letter twice before he put it back in its envelope. He kept thinking about the dream. I will go back to Misselwith, he said. I'll go at once. And he went through the garden to the villa and ordered Pitcher to prepare for his return to England. In a few days he was in Yorkshire again, and on his long railroad journey he found himself thinking of his boy as he had never thought in all the 10 years past. During those years he had only wished to forget him. Now, though he did not intend to think about him, memories of him constantly drifted into his mind. He remembered the black days when he had raved like a madman because the child was alive and the mother was dead. He had refused to see it, and when he had gone to look at it at last, it had been such a weak, wretched thing that everyone had been sure it would die in a few days. But to the surprise of those who took care of it, the days passed and it lived, and then everyone believed it would be a deformed, crippled creature. He had not meant to be a bad father, but he had not felt like a father at all. He had supplied doctors and nurses and luxuries, but he had shrunk from the mere thought of the boy and had buried himself in his own misery. The first time after a year's absence, he returned to Misselwith, and the small, miserable-looking thing languidly and indifferently lifted to his face the great grey eyes with the black lashes round them. So like and yet so horribly unlike the happy eyes he had adored, he could not bear the sight of them, and turned away pale as death. After that he scarcely ever saw him except when he was asleep, and all he knew of him was that he was a confirmed invalid with a vicious, hysterical, half-insane temper. He could only be kept from furies dangerous to himself by being given his own way in every detail. All this was not an uplifting thing to recall, but as the train whirled him through the mountain passes and golden plains, the man who was coming alive began to think in a new way, and he thought long and steadily and deeply. Perhaps I've been all wrong for 10 years, he said to himself. 10 years is a long time. It may be too late to do anything. Quite too late. What have I been thinking of? Of course, this was the wrong magic, to begin by saying too late. Even Colin could have told him that, but he knew nothing of magic, either black or white. This he had yet to learn. He wondered if Susan Sowerby had taken courage and written to him only because the motherly creature had realised that the boy was much worse, was fatally ill. If he had not been under the spell of the curious calmness which had taken possession of him, he would have been more wretched than ever. But the calm had brought a sort of courage and hope with it. Instead of giving way to thoughts of the worst, he actually found he was trying to believe in better things. Could it be possible that she sees that I may be able to do him good and control him, he thought. I will go and see her on my way to Misselwick. But when on his way across the moor, he stopped the carriage at the cottage. 7 or 8 children who were playing about gathered in a group and bobbing 7 or 8 friendly, polite curtsies told him that their mother had gone to the other side of the moor early in the morning to help a woman who had a new baby. Our Dickon, they volunteered, was over at the manor working in one of the gardens where he went several days a week. Mr. Craven looked over the collection of sturdy little bodies and round, red-cheeked faces, each one grinning in its own particular way, and he awoke to the fact that they were a healthy, likeable lot. He smiled at their friendly grins and took a golden sovereign from his pocket and gave it to our Lisbeth Ellen, who was the oldest. If you divide that into 8 parts, there will be half a crown for each of you, he said. Then amid grins and chuckles and bobbing of curtsies, he drove away, leaving ecstasy and nudging elbows and little jumps of joy behind. The drive across the wonderfulness of the moor was a soothing thing. Why did it seem to give him a sense of homecoming which he had been sure he should never feel again, the sense of beauty of land and sky and purple bloom of distance and a warming of the heart at drawing nearer and nearer the great old house which held those of his blood for 600 years. How he had driven away from it the last time, shuddering to think of its closed rooms and the boy lying in the 4-posted bed with brocaded hangings. Was it possible that perhaps he might find him changed a little for the better, and that he might overcome his shrinking from him? How real that dream had been, how wonderful and clear the voice which called back to him in the garden, in the garden. I will try to find the key, he said. I will try to open the door. I must, though I don't know why. When he arrived at the manor, the servants who received him with the usual ceremony noticed that he looked better, and he did not go to the remote rooms where he usually lived, attended by Pitcher. He went into the library and sent for Mrs. Medlock. She came to him somewhat excited and curious and flustered. "How is Master Colin, Medlock?" he inquired. "Well, sir," Mrs. Medlock answered, he's different in a manner of speaking." "Worse?" he suggested. Mrs. Medlock was really flushed. "Well, you see, sir," she tried to explain, "neither Dr. Craven nor the nurse nor me can exactly make him out." "Why is that?" "To tell the truth, sir, Maester Colin might be better and he might be changing for the worse. His appetite, sir, is past understanding, and his ways—" "Has he become more peculiar?" her master asked, knitting his brows anxiously. "That's it, sir. He's growing very peculiar when you compare him with what he used to be. He used to eat nothing, and then suddenly he began to eat some enormous, and then he stopped again all at once, and the meals were sent back, just as they used to be. You never knew, sir, perhaps, that out of doors he never would let himself be taken. The things we've gone through to get him to go out in his chair would leave a body trembling like a leaf. He'd throw himself into such a state that Dr. Craven said he couldn't be responsible for forcing him. Well, sir, just without warning, not long after one of his worst tantrums, he suddenly insisted on being taken out every day by Miss Mary and Susan Sowerby's boy Dickon, that could push his chair. He took a fancy to both Miss Mary and Dickon brought his tame animals, and if you'll credit it, sir, out of doors he will stay from morning until night." "How does he look?" was the next question. "If he took his natural food, sir, you'd think he was putting on flesh, but we're afraid it might be sort of a bloat. He laughs sometimes in a queer way when he's alone with Miss Mary. He never used to laugh at all. Dr. Craven is coming to see you at once, if you'll allow him. He never was as puzzled in his life." "Where is Master Colin now?" Mr. Craven asked. "In the garden, sir. He's always in the garden, though not a human creature is allowed to go near for fear they'll look at him." Mr. Craven scarcely heard her last words. Anna. Thank you. We'll go on to part 3 tomorrow.